What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. As the title of this video suggests, I wanted to put together kind of a compilation to show you the whole process, start to finish, of our potato grow out in the raised beds this year. So we'll kind of jump through this footage showing dates along the way, starting with how we prep the beds for planting, cutting the potatoes before planting, how we planted the potatoes, what we did with the plants along the way, and then what we harvested at the end. So let's start out by going back to early February when we had some mustard greens growing in a couple of our raised beds. We'll show you how we got rid of those mustard greens and prepped those beds for potato planting. And just as a side note here, we've talked about the whole mustard green biofumigation process on a lot of previous videos. If you can plan ahead well enough, it's a great idea to grow mustard greens, whether they're edible mustard greens or cover crop mustard greens. Grow some mustard greens where you plan on planting potatoes the following spring. So plant your mustard greens in the fall or winter months, and then do what I'm about to show you before you plant your potatoes. Alright, so I got all I wanted to get there. Enough for a little small mess of mustard greens. Not going to feed an army with that, but it'd be a nice little tasty treat. The rest of these leaves we left out here we'll use for biofumigation purposes as we turn those into the soil, just like we've done in the past in our in-ground garden. Before I start digging around here, I need to get my drip tape out, so I'm gonna do that real quick. I don't think I'm gonna use drip tape on these taters, so I might just go ahead and disconnect the majority of what we have set up here. Just want to make sure I find all those staples. So now that we've got our drip tape removed, we just want to start chopping and flipping this stuff. I'm just going to dig down with my shovel, just kind of turn this stuff over here. Pull out a few of those weeds as we go. Chop it up a little bit, get it broken up. We are going to need this to be, you know, somewhat soft and broken down. We don't need it too chunky when we come in here to plant taters. So I'm going to get it mixed up pretty well here. Alright, so just after a few minutes of chopping and flipping, this is where we're at. Still looks a little crude, but we're about to fix that. So I've got three different things that we're going to add to this bed. We've got a little coop grow fertilizer there. We've got some mushroom compost. And then I've got some worm castings plus worms from our worm farm over there by the barn. So I think I'll start off with the coop grow here. Not going to put a ton of it down. Just kind of a light sprinkle. As we get some rain over the next couple weeks, let this stuff start breaking down. Let this organic fertilizer start breaking down. That way it can be available to our next round of plants. Then I'm going to put down my worm castings. They're a little wet, little chunky. That'll be all right. Got a decent amount of worms in there too, which is okay because we got plenty of worms. Hopefully the worms will help kind of break down some of this stuff over the next couple weeks. Got some nice castings here after having that worm farm for a year and a half. And then lastly, one of our favorites, the old black velvet mushroom compost. This is one of the best things you can do for raised beds or containers, in my opinion. A $5 bag of this will do wonders for your soil. I really like it for raised beds because it helps them retain moisture. Raised beds dry out faster. They don't hold water as well as the in-ground garden, but the mushroom compost definitely helps and helps get some good biology going. So, oh, these bags are heavy. We might end up using this whole bag here. We'll just see how much it takes to cover up all that vegetation. All right. I'm liking the way that's looking right there. So now you can't even tell we had anything planted here. This mushroom compost and other stuff will get more incorporated into the soil when we dig a trench or a furrow to plant those potatoes. But right now the mushroom compost is just kind of keeping that mustard from growing back. So that's how we got those beds ready to plant. Now let's fast forward to the middle of February when we cut our potatoes to get them ready to plant. And just for a little background on this part of the process, we usually order our seed potatoes from Wood Prairie Farm in early January. Go ahead and get them here. We put those bags of seed potatoes in a dark closet until we start to see sprouts on them. And then when we go to cut them up, as I'll show you here in a minute, we like to follow what we call the half an egg rule. So ideally we want each piece of the seed potato to be about half the size of a large egg, and we got that from Jim over at Wood Prairie Farm. He gave us that tip a couple years ago. So we've got all our seed taters here. We pre-sprouted these in a closet, and they've just been hanging out under the barn in these tubs for the last few weeks. These smaller quantities here are what's going to go in the raised beds. So let me give you a few examples of how we would cut these, or some that we may not cut at all. So here we've got a rose gold seed tater, got 5 or 6 nice sprouts on it, and this is about the size of an egg. So we pretty much want to cut this one in half, but I want to try to get equal amount of sprouts on each piece. So in some cases I may cut it this way, in some cases I may cut it this way. For this one here, looks like just cutting it right in half like that gonna work pretty well. So there we go, we've got our 2 pieces. But for this rose gold tater here, looks like most of the sprouts are kind of on this top end here. So instead of cutting this one like we cut that last one, I'm gonna cut this one across like this right here. And that way we've got relatively equal number of sprouts on each piece. Now for the Charlotte variety here, some of these are about the size of an egg, but some of them are kind of small. So for that little nugget right there, I'm not going to cut that at all. We're just going to plant that one whole. I could cut it, but going by that kind of half an egg rule, we're going to leave that one whole. This one here I will cut, and looking at the sprouts there, I think we'll just cut it in half that way to give us 2 pieces. And also, hopefully now you can see just how much you get once you cut them up. Even with these 1 pound quantities here, you can see we've got quite a few there. Once we cut them up, we've got more than enough in these 3 tubs here to cover those 2 long skinny raised beds. Now a lot of the old timers out there have their own little set of tricks that they swear by, and so a lot of them will coat their taters once they cut them with sulfur, lime. You hear all kind of different things people use to coat the cut surface of the seed taters there. I don't coat mine with anything. I've tried coating them with stuff in the past, couldn't tell it really made a difference. So I don't coat mine. We'll just put them back under the barn for a few days. We don't want to plant them like this right after cutting. We do want to let this kind of wound here heal, process we call suberization. So we want to let that kind of scab over and toughen up a little bit before we put these in the ground. That's why we cut them, say 3 or 4 days before we want to plant. So that's how we cut and prep our seed potatoes for planting. Now let's fast forward just a few days and show you how we actually planted them in those beds. And I want you to especially take note here of just how thick we were able to plant them in those beds. And so as I've told you in previous videos, ideal tater planting time is going to be a few weeks before your average last frost date in late winter, early spring. Doesn't have to be exactly 2 weeks before your average last frost date, but that's a good time frame to aim for. Another thing you want to consider is how much rain is in the forecast. You don't want to plant taters if you're about to get a bunch of rain, because that can cause them to rot in the ground. And looking at our forecast for the next 10 days or so, like I said, today is Sunday. Looks like we might get a little bit of rain this Friday, but we're pretty much clear of precipitation in the forecast for a good 8 or 10 days, which means it's a perfect time for us to be planting. All right, so in the raised beds here, the way we did this last year is we made some trenches in here, and then as the potatoes sprouted and grew, we backfilled the trenches and then healed them. That worked really, really well. It's going to be hard to do that in this long skinny bed, and because it's so full here, I can maybe get 1 trench down the middle, but I want to plant more taters in here than that. So we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to just use this little dibbler, and we're going to make us a hole and just kind of poke our seed taters down in that hole and put as many as we can in this bed. I noticed some of those worms in here earlier that we put back when we were flipping these beds. They seem to have done a really good job of chewing up that vegetation that we buried. So we got some beautiful, beautiful soil here. There's one of those worms right there. All right, so we're gonna try to plant the Charlotte and Rose Gold in this bed. So just start by making some dibbles here a little bit. Put one in this hole. Just like that. And we're gonna plant them in here pretty thick. We noticed last year in our other raised beds that, you know, planting them thick didn't really hurt yield here. So
I tried that.
As we can, yeah. Stick them down this hole right here.
Okay.
Put the last one right there.
I did it so deep down there you can't even see it, Dad.
All right, so we got Rose Gold and Charlotte in that other bed. For this bed here, it's the same size. We're gonna do Purple Viking down this side. And then for the other side, I've got some leftovers from those varieties we planted in the in-ground garden, so we'll just scatter those. There you have a little hodgepodge on that side and a single variety on this side. All right, Titus, you ready to go?
Yeah.
All right.
Look at that.
Put it in the hole. There you go. All right.
Okay, this one's big.
That's a big one. Get it in there. All right, good job. All right, we're good on that row with the Purple Vikings. Let's go get some of those other leftover ones we got. All right, so you can see here we had a decent amount of taters left over from our in-ground planting. Usually 5 pounds is just the right amount for a 30-foot row, but had a lot more left over this year. I don't know if my seed taters were bigger or maybe I was a little more frugal with cutting them, but got more leftovers than we usually have. That's all right though. We're about to find a home for most of them right here.
Oh, look how big that one is.
That's a big old piece, ain't it?
Okay, I can't even put it in there.
That's all right. All right. We are done.
I know, a little bit taking one.
A little bit? You want to take one home with you? One of those two? Okay. All right, so we got both raised beds planted now. We put about 1.5 times more seed taters in this bed than we did that bed over there. So that'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on, see if we end up with some smaller taters in this bed where we packed them in there a little tighter. And so now we just play the waiting game. We won't give these any water until we start seeing leaves popping out of the soil. We want to keep the soil nice and dry so these seed taters don't rot. So should take about a couple weeks and we should start seeing some leaves popping out of the soil. And if you've never grown taters before, just kind of give you an idea what will happen here. So we've got our seed tater piece down in the soil, got this little sprout here where the leaves will eventually form on top of the soil, but it will start to form roots right here pretty soon, right on top of this seed tater piece. It will look like a little spider. So those roots will form right around where that sprout is, and they'll connect out into the soil there and anchor down, and the sprout will grow up, and that's where our leaves will come from. We'll get roots and leaves from anywhere we have a sprout on any particular seed tater piece. So after waiting patiently a couple weeks, we started to see some little green leaves emerging from the soil in those raised beds there. Now let's fast forward to around the middle of March, where the potatoes have been in the ground about a month and they're really starting to take off. And then over here in the raised bed plot, these are looking even better than those in-ground potatoes are. I can't remember exactly which varieties we have planted in each of these long skinny beds. I want to say this bed here has Purple Viking and then some leftovers from those in-ground varieties. And I think this bed here has Charlotte and Rose Gold in it. So the fast growth on these tells me that these plants really like what we got cooking as far as our soil mix in these raised beds. Before we planted these potatoes, about a couple weeks before we planted them, we added some mushroom compost, some worms and worm castings from our worm farm, and some of that coop grow fertilizer. Now over here in these raised beds, we're gonna have to do things a little bit differently because these taters are planted so thick and they're growing so fast, and my soil in my raised beds is almost all the way to the top already. So probably later this afternoon or tomorrow, what I'll do is I will sprinkle some coop grow amongst these plants here as best I can. Probably get me a couple bags of mushroom compost and just try to kind of work it around those plants. Give them a little bit of extra soil to work with. We're not going to be able to heal these real tall, but I am going to try to add some soil there. And so once those plants started growing, they grew really fast. Now let's jump to the end of March where they had grown significantly in just a couple weeks and show you how we added some compost to those beds to kind of heal or mound the soil around those plants. So it's hard to believe by looking at these plants here that these have only been in the ground a month and a half. These things are growing so fast. I don't know if this is Charlotte or Rose Gold that's blooming here, but one of these varieties is blooming. We planted both Charlotte and Rose Gold in this bed. Can't remember which variety went on which side of the bed. These plants are just going crazy in here. We almost need a trellis for them because I know pretty soon they're going to get so tall they're going to start falling over. Now because these raised beds are almost all the way filled with soil, we're not going to be able to heal these like we did our in-ground potatoes, but we're going to try to add some compost in there, try to sprinkle some between those plants, give them a little more support considering how fast they're growing. So I've got a few bags of mushroom compost that I'm going to bust open in my wheelbarrow here. Now this is the same Black Cow brand that you'll find in the yellow bags at your big box store. For some reason, this I get from a local greenhouse supply store, comes in white bags, but it's the same stuff that you'll also see in the yellow bag. Now because I've got such a jungle of tater plants here, I can't just shovel this stuff into the bed. I'm going to have to be a little more delicate with it. So I'm going to take my coffee can here and I'm just going to try to sprinkle it between these plants here. Get as much in there as I can. Alright, so not a super duper healing by any means, but this should help stabilize these plants, especially as fast as they're growing. I know inevitably they will spill over the side of this bed. We're just prolonging the inevitable by adding some compost there. And in case you're wondering why we didn't add any coop grow before we did that, like we did with our in-ground taters, I had already added some about a week ago. I sprinkled some on both of those beds, and as you can see by the color of the plants, that soil's pretty fertile. I think they're good for right now. So our plants were looking pretty good going into that last month of growth. Now let's fast forward to the end of April, where we started having a few little disease spots popping up on our potato plants. We'll tell you whether we were or weren't worried about those disease spots and give you a few really helpful potato growing tips, including the importance of watering well in that last month. And these two raised beds full of potatoes are following suit as well. This one here looks really good. This one over here has had a few plants that started wilting on me there. Not sure what happened with those, but most of them look pretty good. And speaking of container taters or raised bed taters, got a message the other day from someone showing me a picture of their taters in containers. It was their first time growing them, and they wanted to know if it was normal for them to get 2.5 foot tall or taller. And like I told them, if you got some good soil there, that's not unusual at all. Those in the raised beds behind me there are about 2.5, 3 foot tall. I'm surprised they haven't fallen over the side of the bed yet. Now another message we've been getting a lot lately is I've got some spots on my potato leaves or some discoloration. Should I spray them or should I just leave them? And I think that decision is going to depend a lot upon how far you are into the game. If you're in the middle or late part of the third quarter going into the fourth quarter like we are, probably wouldn't worry about it a whole lot. But if you're in the first quarter, you're in the beginning of your potato grow out and you're already starting to see stuff like that, probably want to use a fungicide, try to slow that down a little bit so it doesn't cripple your plants too much. But in our case here, with less than a month to go, I'm not going to worry about potato plant diseases a whole lot. If we get some, we get some, so be it. The heat's going to start working on these plants pretty hard in the next few weeks, and potato plants naturally will have that dieback down here as they reach their maturity date. So they're going to get killed off one way or the other. I don't mind a little plant disease. If I see some this late in the game, it's not going to make me rush to go grab a sprayer. we'll just let what will happen happen. And we are actually pretty fortunate down here as far as potato pest issues go. I know in other places they deal with potato beetles and all kind of different potato pests, but down here we really don't have a lot of issues on our potatoes. We have issues on other nightshades like peppers and tomatoes, but not really on potatoes. Don't really ever see a lot of bugs on them. Don't see a ton of disease, maybe a few spots here and there. I haven't sprayed any of these potatoes one time. We've just been letting them go, and it seems like if we've got nice, good organic matter in the soil, nice, healthy soil, they can kind of push through any little obstacle they may run into along that 3-month window. So besides planting at the right time, getting these things in before it gets too hot, the 3 most important things for getting a really good potato harvest are fertility, well-drained soils, and frequent watering. So we'll start out with fertility. Some people may have wonderfully fertile soils, but most of us are going to have to add some fertilizer. We've already side dressed these twice with Coop Grow. Each time we healed them, we side dressed them with some Coop Grow. Potatoes aren't as hungry as something like corn, but you do got to feed them. And then the last 2 keys kind of go hand in hand, the well-drained soil and the frequent watering, because you can't do the frequent watering unless you've got well-drained soil. So in talking to Jim over at Wood Prairie in the last few years, I really understood the importance of frequent watering in this home stretch. It really helps get those potatoes to size up and give you a nice yield. Now, if you've got soil that doesn't drain very well, that's going to be hard to do because frequent watering is going to easily oversaturate the soil, and as those potatoes mature, they could start to rot because the soil is too wet. Thankfully, in this plot, we've added tons of compost over the years. It drains really, really well. We got 6 inches of rain a week or 2 ago, and just about 2 days later, I was out here watering these again. So the goal here in the home stretch is frequent watering. We don't want to oversaturate the soils. We just want to give them a splash, keep those plants happy, help those potatoes continue to enlarge to maximal size. And a lot of times potato plants won't tell you when they're thirsty. It's got to get pretty dry out here before these plants start looking pitiful. So the plants aren't necessarily going to tell you that they need water, but just know in that last month they do. And so what I've been doing lately with these raised bed potatoes, because I don't have these on drip, been coming out here every afternoon and giving these a little splash with the hand nozzle. Not a ton of water, just standing over each bed for a minute or 2 with some soft water, just to keep them nice and happy. And lastly, let me take you to the middle of May, which wasn't too long ago, as I'm standing here now, and show you what we actually harvested from those 2 long skinny raised beds. But anyways, getting back on track with our garden work today, we've got 2 raised beds of taters here that need digging. This one probably more than that one, but we're going to go ahead and get both of them today. Now before we start digging these, I figured it'd be a good time to talk about how we know when potatoes are ready to harvest. So number 1, you've got your listed maturity date, whatever it is for the variety that you planted. Some potato varieties are going to mature around 90 days. Some might take 110, 115 days. Some varieties are going to be ready to harvest a lot sooner than others. So keep track of when you planted, assuming you had sprouts when you put your seed tater pieces in the ground. Keep track of when you planted, and when you get close to that listed maturity date, should be about right. And then the second really easy way we know they're ready to harvest is that plant dieback that you saw earlier in those raised beds. Those plants that were once nice and lush and green are now all yellow and kind of dead looking. So for us down here in the deep south, once we start getting temperatures in the high 80s, low 90s, potato plants don't like that at all. They'll start dying back. Some of this dieback we see here may be a little bit disease related, a lot of it's heat related, and the fact that we're coming up on that listed maturity date. Now one more thing before we start digging these, I wasn't able to heal these in the raised beds near as much as I would have liked, because when we planted these, the soil was kind of already topped off to the top of the beds. Now we did plant them pretty deep down in there, but they'll kind of push up over time. And as you can see here, we've got a few potatoes that are exposed to the sun. And that's why I always say, whether you believe or not that it actually improves production, it's a good idea to add soil to your potato plants as they grow, or heal them, as we like to say, if for no other reason than protect them from being exposed to the sun and turning green on you. So let's start digging this first bed here, which has two different varieties planted. We planted a variety called Rose Gold and a variety called Charlotte. Can't remember where each variety is, but we'll find out here shortly. We're just going to start pulling up these plants, kind of scratching down there, probably pretty deep, and finding our taters. I know Brooklyn's also been scratching around in here a little bit too. Those there aren't huge. There's a nice one. There's a big one. This looks like the Rose Gold variety here to me. Decent little production there so far. Now I also have noticed, in addition to these lovely taters, I've got a decent amount of ants in here as well, so I'm going to have to move fast or else these things are going to tear my hands up. They ain't as deep down there as I thought they may be. We're getting a decent amount of them. It's perfect size right there. Now that plant right there looks like it might have underperformed a little bit. Got a bunch of smaller ones. We can find some better ones. There we go. Put all its energy into that one right there. And so, as I've told you before, anything between an 8 to 10 times multiple is a pretty dang good tater harvest. You're not going to get that every single year. That's kind of a good goal to strive for. In these raised beds, we planted 1 pound of every variety. So if we harvest 8 to 10 pounds of each variety, we would have done pretty good. Anything over 10 pounds, that's just great. And so this is what we got from planting 1 pound each of the Rose Gold and the Charlotte variety. Now I knew the Rose Gold was going to be a really good producer. We grew it last year, had a 37 times multiple last year. Knew that probably wasn't going to happen again, but I'd say we got close to 10 pounds in that bucket there. Nice size on those, really, really solid producer. Now the Charlotte variety here I had never grown before. Don't know how many pounds we got there, probably around, I don't know, 6 or 7. Doesn't make huge potatoes, but man, those are pretty. And we'll cut some of these open in a minute just to show you what they look like. But this is a good example that not all tater varieties are created equal. Some varieties make smaller taters like that right there. They're going to be really, really tasty. Some varieties are going to make bigger taters. Those are a lot bigger. We got a lot more weight from that variety, but they're not near as pretty as this variety. So it's fun to plant a bunch of different ones and kind of compare them. Now let's move over to this bed where we've got a variety called Purple Viking on this side, and then on this side we just planted a hodgepodge of leftovers that we had from our in-ground plot. So the Purple Viking is what I'm really going to be looking at here, seeing how that variety produced, since we've never grown this before. Now these aren't died back near as much as that other bed, but they're died back enough that we can harvest them. And I should also mention, normally you wouldn't want to dig potatoes after you've just gotten 4 inches of rain the day before. I would not dare dig any in-ground taters today. But in these raised beds with very well draining soil, we can get away with it. Go ahead and knock these out. So let's see what we get with our Purple Vikings here, and then we'll work on our hodgepodge of varieties over there. And those are pretty right there. Nice dark purple color on those. Man, way down there. Look at there. That's a pretty looking tater. Have to get way down deep in there for these, but shoot, we got 3 or 4 nice ones off just one plant there. There's some more right there. So this is going to be a winner. I like what I'm seeing so far with these. Just going to have to work for them a little bit. Mercy. Look at the size on that. I don't remember if Purple Viking was early maturing or not, but based on the size of these, I would say it probably is. Finding a bunch of those little worms in there. Remember, before we planted these, when we got these beds ready, we added some worms and worm castings. It looks like those worms have definitely multiplied. Alright, so this is what we got total from the second bed. Pretty decent amount of those purple Vikings there, especially considering we only planted 1 pound. Now those are really pretty, hard to tell right now because they got so much dirt on them. Once they dry off a little bit, we can shake that dirt off, you can see the real pretty exterior to those. Nice size on those really big taters. And then right here we've got a mix of Huckleberry Gold and Baltic Rose that we had left over from my in-ground rows. Most of the purple ones are at the bottom. You see mostly Baltic Rose at top there, but you know, over half a 5-gallon bucket full from just a pound of those in this bed. Now, if you have anybody try to tell you that potatoes ain't worth growing in a backyard garden because seed taters are too expensive, you tell them 1, they're crazy, and 2, they don't know how to grow taters. Because with not much effort, we were able to turn 4 pounds of seed taters into all this right here, and just those 2 little skinny raised beds. Probably at least 40 to 50 pounds of taters right there. And if you're having trouble getting to that 8 to 10 times multiple on your tater harvest, remember, as I've told you on previous videos, you gotta just keep it simple when it comes to growing taters. You need some really good, well-draining soil. You need to water them well in that last month of growth there, and you gotta feed these things. Don't believe that online baloney that if you just put down a bunch of wood chips, you're gonna get this unicorn soil that you don't have to fertilize. You gotta feed these things at least 2 times, if not 3 times, and you will be rewarded. You'll get that 8 to 10 times multiple, or maybe even more. So I hope you enjoyed that compilation of footage there showing start to finish the potato process. If you've never grown potatoes before in your backyard garden, hopefully that will inspire you to do so. And if you've grown potatoes before but are struggling getting a decent harvest, hopefully those tips we shared along the way will help you get to that 8 to 10 times multiple. So we had a great potato harvest in the raised beds this year. Not our all-time best harvest, but a great harvest nonetheless. If you want to see our best harvest ever from our raised beds, watch this video right here. We'll show you how we got a 37 times multiple on one particular variety a year or so ago. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.